founder and CEO of COR Health, which is developing a home kit for testing chronic inflammation. So welcome to Modern Healthspan, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Very nice to be here.
So, Bob, could you provide some background about how you ended up founding COR Health? And
Sure.
yeah.
I've been a serial entrepreneur, tech guy. My training is in optics and spectroscopy, so the sorts of things that I tend to gravitate to tend to be optics related, how to do things involving light and optics and spectroscopy. I was working on my own startup in 2008 when I reached out to Steve Jobs at Apple because I thought he might be interested in what I was doing, and I was fundraising. And of course, I didn't know at the time, I was not smart enough to realize that Apple doesn't really invest in startups. But that's why I was reaching out. And surprisingly, my phone rang and it was Steve Jobs. Turned out he was very interested in that technology. And Apple ended up acquiring that company in late 2009. I became a platform architect at that time, director of platform architecture. And what that means, what platform architecture means at Apple is platform. The platform part means you could be working on any of the different platforms. iPad is one, iPhone is another, Mac Air is anyway. Product line is all divided up into different platforms. And architect at Apple just means kind of early stage ideation. So there are all these different tiger teams at Apple where there's somebody with sector expertise leading a group of people in early ideation sort of activities. So while I was there, I had the opportunity to not only work on the project that they acquired from me, which is still under wraps, but also had the opportunity to work on the Apple Watch, which was just a project at the time. I had a particular interest in health sensor technology. And so the team asked me to architect a series of sensors that could be put inside an Apple Watch. So the heart rate sensor, the EKG sensor, temperature sensor, obviously, those are all sort of sensor technologies that saw first light, as we say, in my team at Apple. And then, of course, they later went on to product teams for productization and reduction to practice, as it were. So anyway, yeah, I'm a tech guy. Have always been interested in Steve Jobs's vision of why technology would ultimately improve lives of people in the healthcare space. So he really fundamentally felt that once the iPhone came along, that was going to be a big boon to allowing people to take charge and empower themselves, give themselves self-efficacy for improving health. So that's kind of was my rally cry, and everything I've done since then has been ideas that are directed towards consumers and how they could really improve their health and their lives through technology.
Interesting. Thank you. And I think we are moving in that direction, which is great to see. So,
yeah.
So you founded COR Health, and can you talk about the test? You're developing a device, and it would be great to get into the device. But kind of before we go into the device, what is kind of the science behind why did you pick the test you picked, and what is the science behind it?
Yeah. Good questions. So my previous effort in the consumer space, we were trying to develop a spectrometer which could measure all kinds of different markers. And it was an infrared spectrometer. It's really, it's very much up my alley, to do infrared spectroscopy type projects. But It was a very complex instrument and had to be rather expensive because it was complex, and it was sort of it priced itself out of the consumer realm. So I started thinking differently uh,
Mm-hmm.
about how I might be able to help in this space and apply my particular expertise. And I decided to focus on inflammation because everything I had been reading over the past several years was leading me to believe that inflammation was really underpinning a lot of but really all some experts say that really all chronic disease, and of course, chronic disease makes up 80% of our healthcare costs in the United States, and really has the highest impact. All chronic diseases have the highest impact on morbidity and mortality in the population. So, if inflammation is really underpinning all of that, then what do I want to do as a tracker? How do I want to track someone's health? Well, I really want to track the thing that's underpinning everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I convinced myself that by tracking inflammation, I'm really tracking everything. I'm really tracking health. I'm really tracking longevity. And so then, is there some sort of God marker that I could be looking at that would really be, best reflect the states of inflammation? And there are a lot of different states of inflammation. So it's not a simple thing going on in the body. There are a number of different a number of different underlying processes. So I wanted to find as non-specific a marker as I could. So what I arrived at for that reason, and for the fact that I felt I could build it very inexpensively at a nice consumer price point, was a test that's been around actually forever, called the erythrocyte sedimentation rate. And so erythrocyte sedimentation rate is very simply the rate at which the red blood cells fall out of your blood tube. If you put a column of blood in a glass tube and hold it vertically, the red cells, being heavier than the plasma, they fall, and you can measure that rate of falling. That rate of falling is related to your state of inflammation. So that's what we decided to do. We can offer it very inexpensively, much less inexpensively than a lab. Well, less expensively than a lab can measure ESR, or really any other inflammation marker. So that's how we got here.
Very briefly, why does the speed at which the red blood cells fall mean that? How is that related to inflammation?
It's related in two ways. One is that there's a process of agglomeration in the red cells themselves. So when you have inflammation, your red cells, the surface of them become stickier and they stick to each other. And that's actually one of the important factors in the inflammatory process is your blood gets sticky. And so you get clogging of arteries. So the cardiovascular aspects of inflammation are heavily impacted by this process of red cells sticking together. Now, when red cells stick together, you can imagine that clump of red cells is now heavier, so it falls faster. So that's a sign of inflammation. The other factor, which also drives the speed of sedimentation, is a protein that's produced in your liver called fibrinogen. And fibrinogen is important in your blood because it's a clotting factor. It causes wounds to heal and so forth. But in the presence of inflammation, the level of fibrinogen goes up. And when the level of fibrinogen goes up, it also makes the red cells sediment more quickly. So it's kind of two things going on, but they're both directionally the vectors are directionally similar. In the presence of more inflammation, there's a higher degree of sedimentation rate.
And this indicates just that you have inflammation in a very general way, that you have like higher background inflammation.
Exactly. Very non-specific. And so the question is, we're not trying to tell you that the core device can get at what's causing that inflammation, but in a tracking sense, the things that I think are most useful to use as trackers are things that are very non-specific. So you think about heart rate variability, or you think about blood pressure. Now, both of those things are found to be very useful for people to track. They're both very non-specific markers. So you can in an N of one sense, where you're talking about one individual, to see how things change over time, you actually want a very non-specific marker, and ESR fulfills that mission.
So the classic marker for inflammation is HSCRP or CRP, one of the two.
Yeah. Yes.
So why ESR rather than HSCRP?
HSCR, well, it's the same. It's the same. Yeah, it's the same thing as HSCRP is just a different assay, so that can read lower levels of CRP. CRP is short for C-reactive protein, and C-reactive protein is another protein produced in the liver, just like fibrinogen is produced in the liver. So they are both liver-produced proteins that are increased in their concentration in blood when there's a presence of in response to inflammation. So there's a tremendous degree of overlap, the correlation coefficient of about 0.7 in overlap if you do big longitudinal studies between CRP and ESR. So they're very similar markers. They're both very nonspecific, and they're both they both give you essentially the same answer. CRP has one characteristic that's probably preferable from a diagnostic standpoint, and that is that its response is a little more immediate to an inflammatory event. So if there's something that's causing inflammation, the CRP marker goes up and back down rather quickly. The ESR marker goes up and back down a little more slowly. Now, interestingly, the way I think about that is that you actually want to know if your CRP has gone back down, are you fine? Or would you like to know from the ESR marker that your inflammation is still somewhat elevated? So I think there actually is some advantage for people for physicians to be measuring both. Actually, physicians often do measure both of those markers together for that very reason. You can have discordance between one and the other, and you can have this one high and this one low, or you can have the other way around. So a lot of clinicians really use that differential information to get at what's going on in your body.
Interesting. So, okay, so we're going to measure this ESR at home. Do you have a device with you? What does the actual test look like?
Yeah, I can show it to you. Actually, I've got one right here. Whether you can, I've got it plugged in on a bit of a short cable, so I'm not sure you can see this.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Okay, so we got the COR logo here, and there's a cartridge, which when I take it out, you'll see this light will eventually turn blue again.
Right. Yeah.
Just turn blue.
Yeah.
So that means it's ready for the next sample. And this is just a cartridge. Actually, I've got a fresh one here. Actually, no, I don't. But I can show you if I take this bottom cap off that there's a little capillary tube here.
Right. Yeah.
And I just I do a finger stick and I hold the tiny drop of blood up to this tube. I fill the tube up to these lines, and then I put the cap back on, like so, and take the reader device, and pop it in, and you see it turn green.
Right. Yep.
When the light turns green, it's going to be sending this data up to the cloud. And 30 minutes later, we'll be able to, we have all the data that we need to return a ESR number to you.
Interesting. So,
Yeah.
but it's not vertical, right? In the diagrams, it always looks vertical.
It actually is. In the this is a prototype
All
where
right.
we were playing around with having the tube tilted, and the version that's shipping actually this tube is vertical.
Oh,
So I
okay.
apologize for that, but yeah,
Oh, no.
it will be vertical.
No, I just wondered if there was some purpose to
Yeah,
it being at an
good
angle.
observation. You can actually do the sedimentation test with the tube at an angle, and the sedimentation happens more quickly. But what we found was we have better precision if we leave the tube vertical, because especially for people who don't have a lot of inflammation, they have very low ESR numbers. We get better dynamic range, if you will, if the tube is kept vertical.
So how would you see people using this device?
Well, what we're observing, we have a few of them out there in the hands of people collecting data right now, and we find that people are basically taking since they have access to it in their home, and there's very little sort of overhead associated with getting a measurement. The question is, how often are people going to want to test their inflammation? And it looks like people are going to want to do it anywhere between once a week to once a month. And during that time, they're going to want to try different fitness, nutritional lifestyles, essentially N of one experimentation. And they're going to want to see whether their inflammation has gone up or gone down. That's the dream of digital health tracking. That's how people use heart rate variability, for example, or blood pressure. So that's exactly how I see people using ESR.
So, I mean, in terms of pricing, I mean, you may not be able to talk. What kind of price are you looking at for the cartridge? Like, so for one test, how much would that be?
Yeah, one test is going to be around $20. So that undercuts what it would cost you to go to the lab and get your ESR done, unless you're that's in the US. I don't know. You're in Hong Kong. I'm not sure how much it costs over there, but it varies country to country. But in the US, the sort of the sweet spot seems to be around $45 you have to pay. Now your insurance might also cover some of that. We haven't gone through that process of getting the device approved for insurance reimbursement yet, but that will come. So each test will cost under $20.
Interesting. Do you have a price for the device at this point? I mean,
around $200 for the device. Okay. So the thinking is we're going to be able to have it come in around $199 for the initial purchase, and that'll include a couple of tests with it. So it's the beauty of ESR is that it's like I say, a very simple measurement, and the readout technology is very well understood, and we can achieve that elusive consumer price point.
Right. So you're uploading the data to the cloud, and so you'll be doing some analytics on that, and providing kind of the information on a phone. I saw.
Yeah. So correct.
Android as well, right? You're not just Apple.
Yeah. It's a web app, so it'll run on a Android phone or an iPhone, either way.
Okay, cool.
Or a desktop computer too, for that matter.
Okay, excellent. So can you talk a little bit about what kind of analytics or what you're looking at in terms of I guess analytics?
Well, we return a number. So our algorithm is basically calculating the sedimentation rate.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a transform involved to put that in terms of Westergren units. So the Westergren ESR number is the sort of the classic gold standard for sedimentation rate. And so we want to make sure we're reading out in Westergren type units. So the number will be anywhere from zero theoretically. So some people's blood, the cells don't sediment at all under the force of gravity. So that would be a zero.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
Is that good or bad?
that's good. That's
That's
very
good.
good.
Okay.
And some people will have a number as high as 100, and that means within a 1 hour period. We're only measuring for 30 minutes, but at the 1 hour mark, we extrapolate and say how many millimeters of sedimentation would have occurred in 1 hour, and the number could be over 100, and that's really overt inflammation over 100. The ESR is an interesting metric because it's allowed to drift up. The normal range for ESR is allowed to drift up with age. So the older you are, the more likely your doctor is to say your inflammation is within the normal range for your age. So me, I'm a bit advanced in age. I'm allowed as a male, so it's also different male female, but a male 50 plus in the US is allowed to have an ESR of 30. And but interestingly, if you look at the literature, and there are some studies where the study population has been restricted only to extremely healthy people of all ages. And in those studies, there's no age dependence whatsoever. So think about that, right?
Yeah.
So there's a population norm that you're allowed to have. You're allowed to be higher as you age. But if you were a super healthy individual, older individual, you would not have an elevated ESR. It would be just as low as it was in your 20s. So the take home message there is there's a lot of headroom in the ESR number to be able for us to be able to say, okay, you're maybe okay by the standard of care, but you can do these lifestyle interventions to get your number lower. That's highly correlated. There's a longevity aspect to it also. So the lower you can get your sedimentation rate, that's highly correlated, or I should say, anti-correlated with longevity or morbidity and mortality. So the lower the number, the lower the morbidity and mortality.
Interesting. Yes, I mean, I know that, inflammation goes up with age, and that's kind
Yeah.
of like taken.
Yeah.
But yes, I haven't seen like a correlation between inflammation and mortality. But yes, it would make sense that
Yeah.
that exists.
Yeah. It's very, very causative.
Right. Okay. So in terms of availability, when do you expect this to be available, and kind of where will it ship?
We're cranking up the machine right now to start cranking these out. And I'm a hardware guy. I've been a hardware guy my whole career. I've been an Apple guy. That doesn't happen overnight. There's a process. We expect to be able to be shipping the first batch of customer orders in December of this year still, though. So we're on a fast track. So a couple months out, and we are going to be shipping initially just US and Canada, but I do expect rest of world to happen pretty quickly thereafter. Because of we do need, there's a regulatory class for this device, but it's a not a high regulatory class for ESR. So we're going to be able to have approval to ship units in Europe, certainly pretty quickly within months after the US launch.
I saw that you said it's going to be FDA registered. So I'm trying to understand. So what does that actually mean in terms? I mean, it's not like approved; it's just registered. But and also, you can have other kinds of devices that measure all sorts of things, like blood pressure, that
Yeah.
have not been approved, and they specifically say, this is not approved. You can't use it for medical. So,
Yeah.
would you be able to ship this, but people can just use it for their own information, or how does that kind of work?
Yeah, most of many digital health devices do have a label on them that says not cannot be used to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. And you can even have the same device labeled two different ways. We were talking about blood pressure cuffs. You can have ones that are FDA registered, and then you can have the exact same blood pressure cuff, and it'll say not to be used for diagnostic purposes. And we could have done that also with this COR ESR device, but we felt that the market was really asking us for something that was an FDA registered device. So that the word registered is used when you're talking about a class 1 medical device, and ESR is classified in class 1. So there's a certain regulatory process that we need to go through in order to be able to have an FDA registered device, and it involves testing, and it involves following a product development process, and it involves having a quality system in place. So all of those parts are, we have to follow in order to be able to be a class 1 medical device. And we're doing that. We decided it was that important to the market. We didn't want to have this sort of non-regulated type device option as an option in this particular case. I'm not against, there might be reason to do that on a blood pressure cuff, but we didn't want that for this.
Excellent. Now, that sounds really interesting. Okay. So if people are interested in what you're doing and they want to know when new developments are coming out, so how can they stay in touch?
Yeah. So we've actually started a waiting list. So people can go to our website today, and you can't buy it today, but you can sign up for the waiting list, and we'll fulfill from the waiting list in the order in which people add themselves to the waiting list. So our website is corhealth.com, COR Health. So there's no E, just corhealth.com. And you can go there and you'll see a link to sign up for the waiting list. And we'd love if your listeners would go there and sign up. It's painless. I'm not sure there's any other detail I need. Maybe you can put it in the podcast description.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do that. Yeah. And I mean, will you be sending kind of informational updates to this waiting list? Okay,
yeah,
excellent.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I shall definitely sign up. Although I assume, do you know where people are as well? Do I need to put my address in or country?
You can. So there's the initial part of when you sign up to the waiting list, it asks you for your first name, last name, email address, and you could stop there. But we ask you some additional survey questions, and one of those is where are you located. So, we would appreciate it if your listeners, if they're not in the U.S., especially if they would tell us where they're located. That'll help us, quite honestly, know which countries to go into next.
Okay, excellent. That sounds really good. So thank you so much. We will put all those details in the description. So Bob, great talking to you. And it looks a really interesting device. And I mean, it's great to be able to do this kind of testing at home.
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks for the opportunity, and appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you. Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Bye
now.